In our last lecture, we have completed stanza number 20 and 21. I'm reading from that passage session. Yet even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. Their name, their years, spelled by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply, and many a holy text around she strews that teach the rustic moralist to die. Now, in the next stanza, that is stanza number 22, Gray is actually providing a kind of a justification, you see, that we, the people, the human beings, they do not want to be forgotten. They do not give up their life. They want the pleasures of life, and that's why whenever a person dies, he suffers from a kind of a regret because he wants that somebody must remember him. Here in stanza number 22, he says, Gray writes, "For who to dumb forgetfulness a prey." That means nobody wants to be forgotten, you see. That here the term prey, and what it says, for who to dumb forgetfulness a prey. That means nobody wants to be forgotten, nobody wants to become a prey to the dumb forgetfulness. This pleasing anxious, you can identify here as an example of oxymoron, and this pleasing anxious being, it is referring to the living human being, right? So this pleasing anxious being ever resigned. So that means none wants to give up his life. Left the warm precincts of the cheerful day. Here the precincts of the cheerful day is actually referring to the pleasures of life, which actually comes to an end with the death itself. Nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. So there is a question mark, there is an interrogation mark. And ultimately, this is a particular kind of an interrogation that Gray is trying to project here. He wants to say that ultimately, each and every human being, they want to be the part of nature, they want to be the part of life anymore, right? So the longing, lingering look behind, there is an alliteration, the alliteration of the law sound. So here it says, this without any single look of regret and unwillingness. That means nobody wants to die. And when somebody dies, he wants the particular fact that after his death, people must remember him, right? It is the general consideration, and you can find that somehow Gray is trying to project here that he, that is Gray, the poet of this poem, he is not an exception in this form, you see. Okay, it is the same reason why a poet is writing an elegy, and in the later section of this particular text we will get the basic implications that Gray is always thinking about that after his death there might be any other poet in the future days who will come and write his poems. Probably you do remember the poem Lycidas by John Milton. There also we can trace the same kind of action being made by the poet. In the next stanza, that is stanza number 23, Gray is pointing to that particular form. He says, on some fond breast, the parting soul relies. The parting soul is actually referring to the dead person, or the person who is going to die. He seeks consolation that he will be remembered, that I have just suggested here in stanza 22. The same temperament is being reciprocated, is being continued in the next stanza. It says, on some fond breast means probably any person who has got influenced by the earlier one. On some fond breast, the parting soul is referring to the person who is dying. The parting soul relies. Some pious drops. Here the term pious drops actually signifying tears. Okay? And why he is referring to the pious drops? Because it is the reference to an elegy. As I've already suggested that we are reading an elegy, and whenever we will deal with the particular form of elegy deals with some kind of sad and sordidness. Elegy deals with some kind of lamentation that is going on. And the pious drops are actually referring to tears, and so far as a poetry is concerned, so far as an elegy is concerned, you will find that the tears are actually referring to the lines that can create tears among the readers. So on some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious drops the closing eye requires. You see, the closing eye is referring to the person's eye, okay, who is going to die there. Even from the tomb the voice of nature cries. So it is the natural desire to be remembered. It is the actual temperament of a human being. So even from tomb, that means after his death, the natural desire to be remembered, it continues, right? So even from the tomb, the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes, lit their own wanted fires. That means it can be possible that the person is dead, but even after death, he should be remembered. That is the fundamental thing that he describes in stanza number 23. In the next stanza, that's 24, Gray is referring to himself, okay? And he says, for thee. Who is this thee? Thee means you, you know, it's an archaic form of archaic terminology. Somehow, literally, if we identify that this thee is referring to Gray, then ultimately from another angle, this thee can also refer to the readers, right? Because it is actually taking the readers into this arena. It says, for thee, who mindful of the unhonored death. So unhonored dead means the dead villagers who have not been honored by others. So for thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate. If chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit means some fellow poet here, shall inquire thy fate. So somehow here you will find that Gray is thinking that after his death, there would be another elegy being written by any future poet. So do you not find here the same thing, the same temperament that had been described or that had been found in Milton's Lycidas? Milton also wanted that. Milton wanted that somehow after his death, there would be any other person who would write another elegy after him. So that is the same thing that Gray is dealing here. So for thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate, because in this particular poem their artless tale is being related. If chance, if perhaps, okay, by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit, that means some fellow poet, shall inquire thy fate. Here, thy fate means the fate of Gray. Haply, some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn. So now you can find here that somehow Gray is relating this particular man, this particular person who is dead, with nature somehow, okay? And it is a kind of a bent towards pastoralism. That means where a human being is being related with nature. Somehow the basic temperament of a pastoral elegy has to be traced in these 3 or 4 stanzas, okay? It is beginning with stanza number 25. Haply, it means perhaps some hoary-headed swain. This term, like hoary-headed swain, this is obviously the phraseology that Gray is using. These are the phrases that have been taken from pastoral elegy conventions, right? And obviously it makes us remember Milton's Lycidas, where Milton is writing his poem, his pastoral elegy, that is Lycidas, after the death of his friend, or his beloved friend, King. So haply some hoary-headed swine, that is the gray-haired peasant, you see, may say, oft have we seen him. Who is this him? Here it might be possible that it is referring to his friend. It might be possible that it is referring to the person who is dead. It might be possible that it is altogether taking Gray into account, right? It might be Gray also. So haply, that is perhaps, some hoary-headed swain, that is the gray-haired peasant, may say, Oft have I seen him at the deep of dawn. As I've already suggested, that is referring to the nature and the natural predicaments. So somehow the time sequence is also important. Why? Because from dawn to dusk, this particular scenario, this particular situation has to be taken. Here it says, oft have we seen him, that is Gray, or might be his friend, or maybe any fellow poet. So oft have we seen him at the deep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away. That means the person who is speaking here, it might be the gray-haired peasant, you see, that he has seen that man brushing with hasty steps the dews away to meet the sun upon the upland lawn or upland lawn. It might be possible that he is referring to that at the beginning of a morning, at the dawn, you see, that when the person who is being associated with nature, he was seen by this man. This might be possible. So it is referring to the early morning. So haply some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. Okay. Again, another thing that I have to say here, his friend West, here is a particular reference to Gray's friend, his name is West, W-E-S-T, who died young. So it might be possible that it is not simply referring to any indistinct figure, rather Gray is trying to refer to his own friend, Mr. West, W-E-S-T, who actually died young. In the next stanza it says, there at the foot of yonder nodding beech. Here beech is referring to the beech tree, and nodding means, it's nodding as if it's swaying and so. So there at the foot of yonder nodding beech, that reeds, that entwines its old fantastic roots so high, his listless length, listless means idle, length means body, at noontide would he stretch. That means he was lying down idly at noon, and pour upon, that is gazing upon the brook, that is the small river, that bubbles blithe, that means that flows with a murmuring sound. So it is also, you can find the same kind of incorporation has been made, the same kind of description of nature is being made, and somehow you can find that in these particular descriptions there are a kind of an assimilation between the poet, or maybe his friend, or maybe any indistinct figure from the countryside, and he has been related to nature itself altogether, because it is the typical pastoral elegy convention where you can find the pastoralism has been taken into consideration and somehow the person has been related with nature. But I am not saying that it is a kind of pastoral elegy, but somehow when Gray is writing this particular poem, he has recourse to the poems like Milton's Lycidas, okay, and somehow there are some references where we can find that a human being has been related with nature, where you can find that the human being has been related with the macrocosm, right? The microcosm and macrocosm is taken into consideration here. So there it says, there at the foot of yonder nodding beech, that reads its old fantastic roots so high, his listless length at noontide would he stretch, and pour upon, that is gaze upon, the brook that bubbles by, that is flowing. Hard by, the next stanza, hard by yon wood, that means hard by means here close to, yon means yonder, So hard by, that is close to the yonder wood, now smiling as in scorn, so as if it's kind of a contempt that it shows, muttering with his wayward fancies, that is, it's the meaningless thoughts, he would roam, now drooping, that is dejected, woeful one, that is somehow woeful situation is being considered, like one forlorn, or crazed, that is almost mad with care. Here it implicates anxiety, crossed in hopeless love. So somehow the temperament of this particular poet, the temperament of this man that has been taken into consideration here, it is a matter of disappointment that is being pointed out. Why? Because somehow he didn't have the ample provisions of respect and ample provisions of remembrance that he provided, or it is not being provided by the people in general. So it's a kind of a contempt, it is a kind of a disappointment that has been taken into consideration here. One morn I missed him, okay, on the customed hill, along the heath and near his favorite tree. Another came, nor yet beside the reel, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. So here is the description, you see, because this is a kind of a narration that is being made by the gray-haired peasant that I have mentioned, that is referred to in stanza number 25. And here it says, one morn I missed him on the customed hill. That means he was not there. I have seen him. Okay, I haven't seen him. So one morn I missed him on the customed hill, along the heath and near his favorite tree. Another came, that is another morning came, nor yet beside the reel. So he was not there where he used to reside, nor yet beside the reel, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. The next, with dirges due in sad array. That means in the next day, we find, that is, he is stating, the gray-haired peasant, he says that in the next, that is in the next morning, with dirges, dirge, you know, it is a melancholic song as I mentioned earlier, with dirges due in sad array, that means it's a mournful procession that was going on. Slow through the churchway path, we saw him borne. That means he was carried by the other persons, and it's a kind of a dirge is being mournful procession is being continuing. Approach and read. Now he says, now you can move there, you can move to the graveyard, you can move towards the cemetery. Approach, go there and read, for thou canst read the lay, that is the song, graved on, that is engraved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. That means there is a hawthorn tree, you see. Under the hawthorn tree, there was his grave, and beside the grave, there was a tombstone erected. And on that tombstone, the engravings say the epitaph, you know. That is the commemorial verses that have been written on a tombstone of a person. So here he says that approach and read, for thou canst read the lay. Graved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. That is, it is referring to the hawthorn tree. And hawthorn tree is very famous. The yew trees and hawthorn trees, these are famous for the reference to death. And now, in the next section, that is stanza number 30, 31 and 32, these three sections, these three paragraphs or stanzas have to be considered as the epitaph of this poem. This is the epitaph that was written on the tombstone of that man. So somehow the question certainly arises, is it simply referring to the epitaph that was engraved on the tombstone of that man? Or rather, it is actually referring to that Gray is writing an epitaph for his own death. Okay, that might be engraved on the tombstone of his. So the epitaph is actually referring to himself, but literally it is signifying, as so far as the poem is concerned, so far as the movement of the poem is concerned, here the epitaph is being erected, or written, or engraved. It says in the epitaph what it's written, here rests his head upon the lap of earth. So here lies buried the person upon the lap of earth. A youth, to fortune and to fame unknown. That means he was not a fortunate man. It was not his fortune, it was not his lot, you see, that is being recorded in this poem. A youth, to fortune, to fame unknown. So he was not a famous man. He was not a fortunate person. He was not a very well-known personality, you see. So here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth, to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth. Here science is referring to knowledge, obviously. So the born poor, he had the opportunity to get knowledge, right? So fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. That means he was a child of melancholy. Somehow the melancholic nature, the melancholic temperament is always present in this man. So here rests his head upon the lap of nature, a youth, to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Large was his bounty. That means he was open to all. His bounty, his generosity was large, and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely sent. He gave to misery all he had. What? A tear. He gained from heaven. It was all he wished, a friend. So somehow there lies the particular thing that he was a child of melancholy. He the tear was altogether being present in this particular form, and always he wished a friend. So is it referring to Mr. West, W-E-S-T, that is Gray's friend that he is trying to mention here? That is a fundamental question that we have to think about. So large was his bounty and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely sent. He gave to misery all he had, a tear he gained from heaven, and it was all he wished, a friend. No further seek his merits to disclose. So don't try to know anything to analyze his merits, right? No further seek his merits to disclose, or draw his frailties, his weakness. Don't try to draw his frailties. Don't try to draw his weaknesses from the dread abode, from the grave. There they alike in trembling hope repose. Here hope refers to merits. Okay, so there they alike, so it is referring to the last day of judgment probably, where you can find that after the end of this life the persons have to reside there. So there they alike in trembling hope repose. What is the trembling hope? Actually the merits have been taken into consideration. Why it's trembling? Because somehow it is thoughtful about the commemoration or commemorative verses being written in the future days. So there they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. So the Father and God is the final place of rest. It is actually referring to the last day of judgment. It is actually referring to Trinity, obviously, right? So somehow this particular epitaph is being written, is being engraved on the tombstone of this man. And as I've already suggested, that these lines have to be considered in terms of Gray altogether, right? So this is the fundamental thing that the text is primarily considering. Now the most important thing in this particular poem, as I've already suggested in our first lecture, that this poem has to be treated as an exemplary text considering the pre-romanticism, a precursors of romanticism. You know, the Gray is considered as a pre-romantics or the precursor of romanticism. So fundamentally, what are the romantic elements? Okay, the theme of didacticism, the theme of permanence and mutability, the theme about the natural predicaments or the nature, the treatment of nature, the treatment of imagination. Okay, and how so far the poem can be considered as an exemplary text that fulfills all the essential requirements of becoming a poem that inaugurates romanticism. These are the questions, these are the topics that you have to discuss in detail and try to look at the poem from these different angles, and then you can get the basic implication of the text. Okay, so here I end the poem, that is Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard. Thank you.